Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Nikon Creators Hour. I'm your host, Mike Corrado, and we got a very special series called On Assignment, where we work with photographers and talk to them about shoots they've had with either the Z6 II or the Z7 II as we approach the next generation of Z. And with us right now, we have Viktoria Haack from Canada. She is going to show us a bunch of nature pictures, but considers herself a generalist in photography. Viktoria, welcome to the On Assignment Creators Hour.
Thank you, Mike. Great to be here.
It's so nice to see you. You and I worked together at a trade show a year or so ago, and you know the chaos of that trade show. We're just running back and forth, and I'm trying to MC and then go speak and then do panels. So it wasn't exactly the best of environments. So I'm actually happy to see you in this environment. And thank you for giving us your time today.
Thank you.
We are going to talk about an assignment you had with the Z7 II. We're going to get into all the nuts and bolts and talk about that. We'll talk about the assignment itself, the creative, where you go, how you choose to go there. We'll talk about the features on the camera that you liked or that you worked with that either impressed you or something that you found very interesting about the camera. We'll talk about Nikkor lenses and the lenses you use. But before we get to any of that, and trust me, guys, that you're tuning in, you're going to see some beautiful pictures. I want to talk to you about you first. But people out there understand that we have a chat box below. We've got technicians waiting for your questions. So throughout this segment, if you have any questions, just write them in the chat box and we'll do our best to answer them as quickly and efficiently as possible. So, Viktoria Haack, you are from Canada. That's about all that I know outside of the time we met together. Talk a little bit about your career and how you got into photography and what about this business that you love the most.
So I'm actually not originally from Canada. I'm from the UK, as you can tell from my accent, but I've been in Canada for 13 years now. Before moving to Canada, I really kind of picked up a camera when I lived on a small island in the UK. And that's where my photography really kind of took off. And then we moved as a family to Canada, moved to a small town called Salmon Arm in BC, in British Columbia. And I was, after living on a small island for 10 years, I was really happy to have this vast landscape to shoot. So I just started shooting everything that was around me and posting stuff on social media. And then people would ask me to kind of shoot a family shoot and that kind of thing. So I ended up moving into kind of people photography. And for the last about 12 years, I've been shooting commercially. So shooting all sorts of different things. So landscapes, I do landscape photography workshops. I do weddings, elopements, just a broad range of different photography. And I love it, yeah.
Do you photograph portraits of challenging people that just don't look good like me? I mean, could you make me look great? I love that term. I love the term generalist. You know, it reminds me back in the early days on my first business card, it says, I photograph animals, I photograph people, I photograph trees, I photograph horses, I photograph. So when you first try to define yourself as a photographer, you know, you try to put yourself into a niche. But as a generalist, I think that speaks volumes to being more versatile and being able to handle anything that anybody comes back to you with, especially when, you know, you're on assignment and trying to work with it, you know, work within an environment in a very compressed situation, as we have kind of done here with the assignment you had with Z7 II. Because like most, you probably didn't have a lot of time with the camera. We're going to talk about all that. But, and by the way, I thought that accent, you were from Brooklyn. I was a little far off, but yes, it sounds like you're from the UK.
Yeah.
But this is all great. And I just want to talk a little bit about your assignment. And I like to kind of give insight as to where the photographer's thinking the day you realize, okay, I'm going to do this. Where does your mind go? How do you start to plot this out? How much time did you have, and what is your strategy to get to these places that you went to?
Well, first of all, I was very, very excited. And then I had to look at my calendar to see where I could fit this in. Initially, I actually had a trip planned, and it was a backcountry trip. But I was intending to go with some other photographers who really know their gear. So that was not going to be a good trip to take the camera, because obviously we were trying to keep the camera a secret and not
Right, at that time it was unannounced, right?
Exactly, yeah. So to be going on a trip with with a bunch of women, one of whom teaches a lot of photography, I knew that she would notice that there was maybe something different. So that was kind of out. So I looked at my calendar, and basically I had a 5-day window in which I could do something with the camera. So then I decided to head into the Canadian Rockies, because knowing that it was kind of a nature and landscape brief, that is a great place to hit up. Whatever the weather conditions, you can always shoot something. So that's where I went.
Beautiful. And those tuning in, you guys are going to see some brilliant landscape work and a little bit of the places, a few of the places that Viktoria went. Again, if you're just tuning in, there's a chat box below. If you have any questions, we have tech sitting on site waiting to answer you as quickly and efficiently as we possibly can. So if you have tech questions about the Z7 II, by all means ask them, or Z6 II. But in this case, our focus is the Z7 II, landscape, lots of file. I mean, you know, again, we're talking a camera rich with megapixels, and we're going to see that within these images. Talk a little bit about your experience with mirrorless, and what has your journey been like in mirrorless? I know you're shooting the Z7 as well. Talk about that.
Yeah, well, just before I tried out the Z7, I bought myself an 850, and I absolutely loved the D850. So I was just in love with that camera. And although I was interested in the mirrorless system, I wasn't, you know, I was so in love with the 850 that I kind of was like reluctant to try it. But then I started shooting with the Z7 as well. And it was a slow for me, because photography is such an intuitive thing. So I'm not very technical. Everything has to be just kind of intuitive. So my fingers go to the buttons without me really thinking about it. So then changing to something with slightly different button placement and just a slightly different feel, it took me a little bit longer, but I didn't realize just how hooked I was. It got to the point where I needed to send my Z7 back to Nikon, and I actually realized that I just could not part with it. So just, I mean, just the weight itself, you know, just the size and the weight of the camera is the first thing. I can take that camera to so many places that I wouldn't take the 850. So I shoot lots of things just when I'm walking the dog. So I'll put the camera into just a little pack, and I don't have to take a big backpack, and I just have it with me. If I see, you know, a cool kind of icy puddle or something, you know, just a detail, I've got that camera with me. And I would never have packed the 850 the way that I carry the Z7 with like the 24-70 lens or something on it. So, and then also once I programmed some of the buttons on the camera, it became very intuitive. So I just couldn't part with it. And then the quality of the lenses, there is nothing to compare. I've not shot with anything that compares with that. And I just, you know, I realized that when I was giving up the Z7, I was also giving up that 14-30 f4, that 24-70 f4, and I couldn't do it. So I realized that I was hooked. So it was kind of a bit of a gradual process, but now I shoot almost exclusively with the Z7, and I'm just in love with it. So
you mentioned the word that I want to capitalize on, called intuitive. So now the Z7 II comes into your hands for the very first time. Talk about that experience, and what did you have to learn? You know, what was new? How did you feel about the form factor, and of course, you know, the familiarity?
It was exactly the same. So it was perfect. So I could take that camera. But so before I even knew what the camera was going to be like, and I was chatting to Chris from Nikon, and I was saying, well, you know me, Chris, you know, it takes me a bit of time to get my head around things. And he said, you won't need any time. And he was right. You know, he gave me the camera, and I knew what I was doing. I just programmed a couple of buttons, and I was good to go. So yeah, very intuitive, and I could shoot with it just straight away. So if for me to do that, I am the least technical person on the planet. So for me to be able to just do that is perfect.
When you mention the Xenicore lenses, what are your favorite go-to lenses, you know, when you're out shooting landscape or whatever it is you do in street photography or portraits?
So the 14-30 f4, I absolutely love that lens. It's very compact, and you know, I can obviously use my filters that I already have. The sharpness is incredible. And one of the things that I've really noticed is, because I do a fair amount of focus stacking, so there's so little focus breathing with that lens. You know, and for those people that, I'm not sure whether people are familiar with what that is, but I would, as I was focus stacking, and so focusing throughout the frame, when I got to infinity, when you put those images together, you would maybe lose some of the area around the thing in the distance when you put the shots together. But you know, there's so little image loss. It's just fantastic. So that one is probably my very favorite. And then strangely for me too, because the 24-70 was never a lens that I used an awful lot, but it's such a great lens that I just have that with me so much, you know, walking the dog or just doing things where I'm not expecting to do any photography. Having that lens, it's small, it's light, and it's so sharp. And I can't believe how close I can get to things. It's almost like a macro. It's an excellent lens. And I haven't actually tried the 70-200 yet, but I'm pretty keen to get my hands on that.
But I understand during this assignment, you used a 70-200 2.8 lens built for the DSLRs with the FTZ adapter, so we'll get to see some of that too. And I gotta kind of brag on you. You're one of the few people that have actually had a chance to photograph with the new Z 14-24.
Yes.
And we can talk about your experiences throughout once we start to launch the pictures. That's pretty amazing. Again, I think, as you would agree, that familiarity is everything, because when you're not sitting there relearning buttons, and anyone I've talked to about this on assignment during this creative hour segment, they've all said the same thing. It's like, I wasn't wasting time figuring out the camera. I just jumped right into shooting, and then I could focus on whether it was a portrait or, you know, the action or whatever it is that somebody was doing. So that's pretty brilliant. What do you say we pull up some of your pictures and just go through them?
Sure.
I would love to hear the details about where you are, tips for shooting landscape photography, and then we can dig into some of the features. But before we bring those up, you know, first impressions on performance with the Z7 II.
Mm-hmm. Oh, I mean, it was fantastic. I was shooting JPEGs with the camera too, which I'm not used to doing. I would normally shoot RAW files, and just what was coming out of the camera, I barely had to edit anything. I mean, it just came out perfectly, and I was just thinking, well, there's nothing for me to do here really. So yeah, I was just really impressed with it. I'm impressed with just the amount that when you do edit the raw files, you can push and pull them so much with the Z7. But yeah, the Z7 II, I'm excited to shoot in a raw format with it as well. But yeah, I loved it.
Beautiful. Let's definitely look at some of the photos as I launch this keynote deck. I've had a chance to preview these pictures, folks. And again, to me, I always look at this kind of landscapes. It's like eye candy. It's like great for the soul, makes you wish you were standing exactly where Victoria was. So as I mentioned before, Victoria, don't hold back. Talk about some of the things you did, the camera settings you made along the way, and I'll just ask questions as we go.
Okay, so for this one, I think this was shot at f11 and with the 14-30 f4 lens. And I was using a graduated neutral density filter just to bring down the sky a little bit. And I think I had my 6-stop ND filter on too. You can see that the water is smoothed out a little bit there, so it's a slightly longer exposure. So this is shot at Bow Lake, which is in the Canadian Rockies. And I wanted to incorporate the foreground foliage. The colors were so beautiful. And I was there for sunrise. We didn't have an amazing sunrise. There wasn't too much cloud as the sun was coming up for the light to catch it. And this is slightly later on from sunrise. And for this shot, I wanted to move away from the edges of the lake to bring in some of that foreground. And I used this little creek was running in towards the lake. So I wanted to use that as the leading line to kind of lead the eye in towards the mountain.
No, it's beautifully done. When you're setting up for a shot like this, for those people that are tuning in that aren't just interested in the Z7 II, but interested in landscape photography, what are some of the other things you do and pack along? You're not driving up to this location. I can imagine you're hiking in somewhere to get to this spot. What are some of the tools that you're bringing with you? Like, I would assume you're on a tripod. What are some of the things you do to make a shot like this? Autofocus mode may not seem crazy important for a static landscape like this, but what focus modes are you using? Talk a little bit about how you got to this place and some of the tools and techniques that you used.
So this is actually, Bow Lake is very easy to access. You can drive almost straight up to it. So it doesn't take much to kind of get to this spot. And Bow Lake is great because it has a really large area of shoreline. So there's lots of possibilities for different compositions. And for this project as well, I was keen to not run into a lot of other photographers. So this was a great spot because it meant that I could move around and, you know, move away from other people if people were there. So for a shot, like for any kind of sunrise shoot, especially in the mountains, very warm clothing is always key. And I always wear waterproof, like big waterproof boots, because you never know whether you're going to be stepping in that water, or it just gives you that ability to go anywhere. And then obviously a good sturdy tripod. And this one, the one that I was using, goes up fairly high because this is a fairly high viewpoint. I'm just trying to think what else. A remote shutter release is handy as well. And for this one, I focused about a third into the frame. And I often will focus about a third in for a shot like this and then just lock the lens to manual and then shoot that way.
No, remote trigger is so important because, like you said, you used a multi-stop or a big heavy stop neutral density filter. So you're trying to get that water to smooth out. And in the morning, there's not a ton of light, right? Focus settings and things like that. How would you focus a scene like this with the Z7 II?
So for this one, I put it into manual focus and I just use the focus peaking. But for this one, I think I seem to remember just focusing about a third of the way in using the autofocus. So just moving the little focus point about a third of the way into the shot and then just locking the focus so that if I wanted to take a number of different shots, you know, I know it's still going to be focused about the same spot into the frame.
It's funny because, you know, as you opened up, we talked to you about being a generalist in photography, as my good mentor Joe McNally is, and I'd like to consider myself. And what I love about scenes like this, especially where critical focus is important, even though you're probably stopping down and you got a lot of depth of field here, is it important for you to have coverage to about 90% of the frame? One of the things I love is just being able to take the points out to anywhere in the frame I want and shoot. Talk about that within your autofocus technique.
Yeah, so I mean, being able to, you know, shift the focus point right out to the edges rather than just being, because I used to have to focus and then recompose the shot and, you know, lock the tripod then, but now being able to kind of have the camera on the tripod, the whole composition set the way I want it, and then just moving the focus point and being able to go, right out to the edges. That is, yeah, really handy. And for portrait photography especially, you know, I quite often have subjects towards the edges of the frame. Being able to shift that focus point is extremely handy. Yeah.
So you mentioned before, you know, the images that you saw coming out of the camera, you didn't really have to do much with, because certainly, you know, within your technique and talent, you put the right things together between the filtering and the setup, you know, to make that picture as good as it can be. What white balance mode are you using? What color settings are you using when you come out into nature like this? So
quite often I'm just on auto because I'm shooting raw as well. So I have got the facility to change that when I come into post-production. Because I was shooting JPEG for these images, I was trying to do as much in camera as possible to make sure that the white balance was the way I wanted it. And I think I had this on cloudy for this because I wanted to have some warmth in the foliage in the foreground there.
No, beautiful. I love that. But how early do you have to get up to make a sunrise picture like this, even though it may be close to where your car is?
Well, for the actual sunrise, I usually try and get there at least 45 minutes to an hour before the sun is due to pop up, because there's quite often a pre-sunrise glow that you get that can actually be better than the actual sunrise itself. And shooting in the blue hour is beautiful. It has a mood of its own. So I like to, if possible, get there a good hour before, and especially if I don't know the location that well. I've got my headlamp on and I'll just be scouting it out, trying to figure out, you know, what my composition might be. So, and then, you know, I can be shooting sunrise for 3 hours because I'm there an hour before, and then I can be there, you know, a good couple of hours after the sun has come up. So especially when you're in the mountains, loads of layers, a few snacks and chocolate bars, you know, the things that are going to enable you to stay there for long enough to just take in the whole thing. It's amazing how, and then I'll suddenly realize 3 hours in that I'm absolutely freezing or I'm starving, but you know, I don't really notice when I'm shooting because I'm so into the actual event that I don't really notice how much time is going by.
That's when you know, though, you're in the zone. That's when you know it's all good and it's all working out. And then you kind of raise your head from the camera and, oh, wow, I am hungry. And, you know, it's time to move on. But this is amazing. Those of you tuning in, if you're just tuning in, we are here with Viktoria Haack, Nikon Canadian ambassador. She's showing us some landscape pictures that she made with the Z7 II. She had an assignment with the Z7 II. There is a chat box below if you have any technical questions about the Nikon Z system, Z7 II, Z6 II. Please write them in the chat box, and we have technicians waiting to answer your questions. But we are focusing on this segment with the Z7 II and Viktoria's experiences. This is beautiful. And, you know, again, talk about the image, a little bit about where you are. Is this your dog? I love dogs. You know, what's going on in this shot?
Yeah, so this is my dog, Jack. So he came with me for this trip. He's quite a handful, so if I don't take him with me, then my husband has to take him to work, which means he's in his office. So this was all fairly short notice, and I hadn't planned for this trip, so Jack had to come. And I had a friend with me as well who was acting as kind of assistant and dog handler and everything. So yeah, Jack's with me, and so he's often with me when I'm shooting, and he's really good at just hanging out while I shoot. And I have him on a leash. He has to be on a line in the national park. So he's on a leash, and he's just hanging out while I'm shooting the landscapes. He's sitting there, and sometimes I'll have two camera bodies with me and just turn and shoot him at the same time as I'm shooting the landscape. And this was pretty much one of those moments. This was after sunrise. We had a nice bit of morning sunlight coming in through the trees. And I shot this one with the 50mm 1.8, the S lens, and this is a f2. And yeah, just a shot of him enjoying the morning. And I love shooting. I love kind of using the backlight. I love the fact that it rim lights his fur. Yeah.
Right. I think backlight is so underused. And I was actually talking on an on-assignment interview with sports photographer Andrew Hancock. And that's mainly what he focuses on, backlight, because of what it does to fringe. But if water's flying, that kind of kicks up.
Yeah, beautiful.
But, so you're out here. You're kind of like, you got to take the dog, right, with you. Do you know you're going out there as the dog as part of your assignment? And or do you just like, there's no creative here. It just sort of happens, right? You just fall into it?
Most of the stuff that I do isn't pre-planned. So I just kind of just head out there, and I tend to try and put myself, you know, I'll check weather forecasts and I'll check apps to see, you know, whether it looks like there might be a good sunrise, or, you know, what might be happening. And I'll try and put myself in the right kind of area. And then I think half of the fun of photography is to just go with what happens and just see what nature provides you with. And if you have a too distinct idea of what you want, you can miss something that nature just provides. So I think going in with a creatively open mind and not being too fixated on capturing any particular thing is one of the best ways that you can actually, you know, be more creative and capture better images, I think.
So as you're used to the Z7, now you're, you know, kind of getting into rolling with the Z7 II. Are you using focus peaking here again, or autofocus? Talk about the autofocus and what you thought about the AF.
So for this one, I would have used the autofocus. And I quite often, when I'm shooting, you know, a human or an animal subject, I'll use the continuous mode. So I'll put it into C mode. And yeah, I would have used that for this. And I find that it's perfect. I just shot a wedding actually, and I was using the 50 f2, and in a very dark room. And yeah, it's perfect. Like it just, I love how sharp the images were that came out. Obviously that's not the Z7 II, it's the Z7, but yeah, same, just using the C mode. And I find, especially if you're shooting into that fairly kind of complex backlight, it works really well.
That's critical too, because most people don't understand when you're using an AF system, sometimes if it's not good, the backlight kind of alters the focus a little bit, and it's tough to focus in. But I found the same thing with the work that I'm doing, especially backlit, that the focus acquires and just locks on dead. Yeah. Beautiful reflections. Yeah, I got to tell you, for somebody who's limited with time, I'm seeing some incredible imagery here. I hope everybody's feeling the same way looking at Viktoria's stuff. But where are you here? Talk about this photo a bit.
So this is, I was on the Icefields Parkway at Bow Lake. And then we took a turning onto the David Thompson Highway, which is an area that's famous for Abraham Lake, which is the place where there are lots of ice bubbles in the winter. You may have seen those images of frozen bubbles in the ice. This area is very famous for that. So we took a turn down towards Abraham Lake, and the colors of the trees were just absolutely beautiful there. It was in full kind of fall color. So yeah, we ended up in this area, and also there was a lot of high water here. So a lot of trees were standing in water, so fairly unusual conditions. I know the water does rise at Abraham because it's on there's a dam there, but this was higher than I've ever seen it. So we were just exploring. This was obviously a sunny day. This is a middle of the day shot, so not the normal time that you would expect to shoot landscape imagery. And as I say, nothing was really pre-planned. We came to this area, the trees were beautiful. I was just trying to capture something of that feeling of that sunny day, and walking through some of these flooded areas, and with the trees and the water, it made a nice kind of leading line that could lead the eye towards the mountain in the background there. So for this image, I put the tripod very, very low, and used the leaves as a foreground element, and I focus stacked this shot so that everything was sharp all the way through, from the stuff that was very close to the lens all the way through to the mountain in the background.
That is awesome. When you focus stack, obviously we're using software, you know, when you get back to the computer to merge the images together. What are you using, in case people are out there wondering what software you're using to put the stack together?
I just use Photoshop.
Oh,
Yeah.
okay.
Yeah.
Very cool. So
Yeah.
that must be a native thing within there, because I've heard of other different programs. I don't focus stack a lot myself, so that's very cool to know that you can do that in Photoshop. God, the simplicity and beauty of this shot kind of hits you, like just smacks you a little bit, as beautiful and serene and simple as it is. What's going on here?
So this is a very, very simple shot too. So just I used the 70-200 2.8 with the FTZ adapter for this one. And the color of the lake water at Abraham is this incredible turquoise blue color. So we had the full foliage coming out of the lake, which was the complementary color of orange coming out of the turquoise blue of the water. And so this one was just, you know, obviously a reflection shot. And I just kind of moved around a bit. There were lots of branches everywhere, just trying to simplify the frame. And yeah, simple. I think I shot this at f5.6. And yeah.
Did you say which lens?
Yeah, the 70-200 2.8 with the FTZ.
Gotcha. That's right.
Yeah.
That's beautiful. So your approach here, where you mentioned that you went to cloudy white balance in an earlier photo, what's your white balance setting here?
I think I was on auto for this one.
Mm-hmm. Got
Yeah.
it. Yeah, I mean, again, I found a lot of times the camera just naturally does what it's supposed to do.
Yeah, and incredibly, I was playing around with the white balance, you know, because I was aware that I was shooting JPEG and, you know, wanting to make sure that I optimized the color. And a lot of the time I just stayed on the auto. It was really good. It was perfect. Yeah.
Like you said, if you're shooting raw, you can always make adjustments in post-production later on. So that confidence is really nice to have. I thought this was another beautiful shot. Who do we have here? Who's in the photo? And where have you taken it? And what settings did you make?
So this is a set of falls that are in the same area as Abraham Lake. And this is my friend Amy, who was along as my kind of dog wrangler and friend and, you know, possible assistant for anything. So I popped her into the frame for this one because it's a very simple shot, and I thought it might look nice with just kind of a pop of color. And she had a nice colored coat on that pops really well. So I just stood her in the center of the shot, and this was a 3-second exposure. So she didn't have to stand still for very long. And I had an ND filter on the lens for this. I was using the 14-30 f4 with an ND on there. So yeah, just a very, very simple shot.
Now, you use the 14-30 f4. You've also had that chance we mentioned earlier to shoot with the 14 to 24 2.8. That kind of completes the trinity of 14-24, 24-70, and 70-200. What are your thoughts about that 14-24?
Well, I mean, just amazing. You know, from what I've used of it so far, just the clarity of it looks fantastic. And the weight, I didn't expect it to be so light. It's really, really light. And yeah, the ability to add in those filters. Obviously, I didn't have those for this assignment. So I use the 14 to 30 quite a lot because I tend to use filters quite a lot. But once I had filters for that lens, I would be using that one a lot too. So yeah, and you know, having the 2.8 for night shots and that kind of thing. And I you know, shooting weddings, having that 2.8 for a wide angle is really handy for me as well. But yeah, I thought it was excellent, and it just felt so much lighter than the DSLR version of that lens. So yeah, fantastic. I know there's lots of people that are very excited about that, and I've had a lot of messages on social media from people saying, what was it like? And yeah, I was very impressed.
So while you mentioned social media, where can people see your work? What is your handle for social media?
So on Instagram, I'm just Viktoria Haack. The spelling of my name is a little bit difficult for people, but if you can get that, you'll find me. So it's VIK for Victoria. And then on Facebook, Viktoria Haack Photography.
Hack, H-A-A-C-K.
Yes, there's nothing about my name.
I've searched you before. You bring up such an amazing point too, because I swear to you, the same impression as someone was handing me the 1424 for the very first time. I'm sitting there waiting to counter the weight, and all of a sudden it was like a feather, and I found the same thing at 51.2, which, I mean, to me is just so cool because, you know, we introduced the Z system with 3 lenses in FTZ. We got a wealth of lenses that have come out since then, plenty more to come. The system is building, it's rapidly growing. And the quality of the stuff that's coming out, it's not just light, but it's ridiculously sharp. And that's what everybody's looking for. And then, of course, the 51.2, having that 1.2 aperture, I think is going to be the status quo moving forward for anybody using fast fixed glass like that. But this is a beautiful setting. So your dog handler turns into a model. And like you say, and I love that thought that you mentioned, just that little splash of red makes the difference, all the difference in the world, because without it, it would be an interesting waterfall. Now this makes it even that much more interesting. So thank you for sharing that. Very beautifully done. Lots of detail here. Again, one of the things I love about the Z7 and Z7 II is it's just got such a big, beautiful, rich file. What are these things?
I don't actually
where
know.
are you?
I'm not sure what these things are called, but they look like
cool.
Yeah, they look like something from Dr. Zeus or something. I'm not sure. But so this shot was taken on a section of the Icefields Parkway, which is no longer in use. So I didn't realize this until recently, but there are sections of the old Icefields Parkway that still run through Jasper and Banff National Park, but people have no idea that they exist. And you can find them. And so this was a section of that roadway that we found. And it's obviously pretty overgrown with different foliage. And I just love these things. I don't know what they are, but I really love them. I love
the pattern is beautiful.
Yeah. Above, I shot them from the side as well and shot some from above. So for this one, I had my 24 to 70 f4S lens on, and that's the one that I often have in my little pack when I'm walking the dog because, you know, for scenes like this, it's so sharp. I absolutely love that lens.
Mm-hmm. Well, you bring up a great point because, you know, there are several lines, series like the 1.8 series fixed. You're talking about the zooms here in the f4 level of 1430 and 2470. For what you're doing, it's got to be so easy on the back. A little less to carry in the way of weights. And then, like you say, you put that 1424 2.8 on, and you almost feel like it's so well balanced. It looks bigger, but it's almost as light as the 14 to 30. So, you know, there's some big advantages in the choices that photographers have. But whatever this is, again, you're always interested by repeating patterns, and it's just so beautiful. And of course, shot at the right time of day, a nice light, a bit softer light, a little more even light. And you know, again, it's a beautiful thing. And I guess that speaks a lot to your discovery as you're walking around. If people are out there that want to get into landscape, what is just always look for anything, look backwards, look forward, look sideways. Is that your approach?
I think at one point I was quite focused on the grand landscape, but I think that there are so many beautiful details to see just at your feet, you know, just the small, it doesn't have to be just because you might be a landscape photographer. You don't have to be just looking for that grand scene. There are so many smaller details, and a landscape, you know, lens isn't necessarily, you know, a wide angle lens. A landscape lens can be, a 70 to 200, or, you know, it can be anything. And I think that the thing with the mirrorless system for me is that it has just become, I just take my cameras to so many more places because, you know, I'm not getting any younger and those camera packs are pretty heavy. And, you know, I do the commercial jobs where I'll have a bag full of lots of different lenses. And then quite often these kind of images are shots that I would take when I'm just walking the dog. It's unexpected. I don't expect to be shooting anything that morning. I'm doing a dog walk before I sit in front of the computer to edit for a few hours, but I can just throw, you know, my camera in and I don't feel anything. I've just got this tiny little pack, you know, like a bum bag thing, you call them in the UK, but I think a fanny pack or whatever, but I just chuck it in the bag and it's tiny. And so I'm just able to shoot stuff that's really unexpected because I just wouldn't normally have had it with me. And it would have been all that effort to put on a backpack. And now there is no effort. So it has allowed my photography to become just more actually, which is, it's just fantastic.
And that's so important, I think, because I mean, shooting years of rock and roll with heavier DSLRs, again, not that they weren't great. I mean, they made me some fantastic pictures, but if I'm shooting an entire set versus 3 songs with a group, it just starts to weigh you down. Landscape even more so because you got a lot of walking, and I'm sure you got your Fitbit on or your Apple Watch or something to log your steps, because I always find it interesting how many steps I take in these types of landscape scenarios, and I'm always proud of myself. It's usually in the tens of thousands, so that's a cool thing. Beautiful, beautiful photo here. What's going on here? Where are you? Certainly you're going to level yourself out. It's like you're standing on these rocks. Where in Canada are you?
So this is back on the Icefields Parkway. This is in the area around the Athabasca Glacier. And you can just about see some of the glacier in the kind of top right corner of the frame there. But this was a very wet and windy day. We were going to get up for sunrise, but there just didn't seem to be any point. We were staying in my van, so we were camped in my van. The van was being kind of whipped everywhere by the wind. We sort of peeked out of the curtains and thought, nah, not this morning. So anyway, we figured there wouldn't be any sunrise color, so probably no point in getting up super early. We had a bit of a lie-in. Then we went out to have a look around and see what we could find. And I loved how moody this landscape was. It kind of reminded me a bit of Scotland. So we were looking for some different foregrounds. We'd seen that there was a river from the road, but we weren't quite sure how to access it. So we just went exploring and we found this river. We found these lovely rocks. And this shot was taken with the 14-30 f4 and with a graduated ND filter on just to bring the clouds down a little bit in the sky. And I think I had my 6-stop ND again on here. So the exposure is just a couple of seconds for this one. But it was pretty tough shot to take just because it was so windy and there was sleet and like a mixture of sleet and rain. So that was all hitting the front element of the filters and trying to wipe that off between shots. So it wasn't very easy to get, but it's a beautiful spot and one that I'll definitely return to as well, having found it now.
Well, the weather sealing and the protection of these cameras is really good. You have confidence you don't have to worry about the camera at all?
Oh, yeah.
Because I found these environments, I just let it go. Certainly, I let it go to a certain point, but the resiliency, and especially in climate conditions like this, is just talk a little bit about that. I assume you didn't put anything on the camera?
No, there was not. So I had nothing covering the camera. I do, if it's really pouring, I'll usually have a plastic bag I can throw over things if I need to. I also shoot quite a lot in waterfalls and shoot people in waterfalls and stuff. And for me, the atmosphere comes when the conditions are usually at their worst. So I love shooting when it's really snowing and it's really raining and it's very windy and there's loads of stuff coming off of a waterfall. So those are my favorite conditions. So I don't want to have to worry that my camera is not going to be able to cope with that. And I don't have that worry. I know when I was, launching into using mirrorless, there's always that question, well, is it going to be, weather sealed enough? And yeah, it's great. It's fantastic. So it's something that I don't have to worry about. And as I say, I just love shooting in those kind of locations and conditions.
But I scream that when I talk about photography and I teach is, I'd rather photograph a horse race in the rain, more mud flies. I'd rather photograph birds in the rain, although beautiful sunny days, make for nice,
Yeah.
colorful pictures. The rain
Yeah.
creates a dynamic. So certainly the foul conditions are just something. This stuff is amazing. I'm having a great time. I hope you guys tuning in feel the same way. We're getting some education and some great insight. You know, one of the things I've learned in jumping up to the Z7 II, I'm a double card slot kind of guy. I've always either used the second slot for overflow. This time around, I'm using it to capture RAW on my main card on the XQD or CF Express that I have. And then the SD is the backup of JPEGs. Does a backup slot mean something to you?
Yeah, there's a, you know, having that extra confidence, and especially, you know, when I'm shooting weddings and that kind of stuff, it's really handy. And for me, I live in a very small town that doesn't have a dedicated camera store. So if I need to get hold of another card quickly, it's much easier to get hold of an SD card. Or if I'm traveling, I can get hold of an SD card that much more easily. So yeah, it's just that added, yeah, it's just great to have. Yeah.
Beautiful. As we're starting to wind down here, again, listen, your work is just so inspiring to me. It's the kind of stuff that you want to look at and stare at for a while. And this is just in landscape. So talk about where you are here and what your settings are.
So for this one, we were heading back down the Icefields Parkway in the direction of Banff. My time was coming to an end. I knew the camera had to get back to Nikon, and I had a time it had to be in Banff. So we were on the road trying to get it back there to send it back. So this is just a roadside stop. We just pulled the van over, and I used the 7200 with the FTZ. And I think this one was shot at, I think, f8. I just loved how the light was hitting the peaks and the textures in the cloud. So, you know, no filters or anything. This is just the camera capturing all of the dynamic range. And that's one of the other things that this camera excels at is just the dynamic range is fantastic. So, yeah.
Right. That's a great point to bring up, because I noticed a different pop in the file, a different range within the file in shooting, you know, across the gamut of, you know, dark to light. Some of the details of some of the bird photography that I do. I was in Chicago photographing pigeons, and you know, in New York, it's typically the gray pigeon, but now pigeons have grown into this species of all kinds of colors. And the one I shot was subtle browns and blacks and warm tones and into cream color and into white. And it seemed the whole detail the whole way. So I think that's a great point that you bring up. The dynamic range is definitely enhanced in the new series, the 2 series for the Z6 II and Z7 II. And here we are, we get to see a little bit of what you were just talking about, where you got your van and you're inside and things are swirling and the wind is blowing. Now it's a little more calm with the doggy in the front. Beautiful, beautiful picture. Talk about this one.
Yeah, so this was my home for the 5 days. So and that's my friend Amy that's actually sitting there with the headlamp on. She doesn't look too impressed in that shot. But this is pre-sunrise, so we're in the blue hour. We were actually waiting to shoot sunrise at Bow Lake. And Jack is having a little snooze outside of the van there. And I shot with this with the 14 to 24 2.8, and it was ISO 3200. So yeah, just, you know, great in terms of noise. You know, the noise is fantastic for the ISO, and the focus was really easy. So yeah.
Yeah, it's funny because most people would kind of lean towards the Z6 II for a number of reasons. Certainly video. High ISO capabilities, and you know, certain speeds at which the camera frame rates at. But I've used the Z7 II for a lot over the last few weeks. I found that the high ISO is pretty exceptional. Did you feel like a big jump up or a jump up from the Z7?
I think that, you know, I've only used this, as you know, for a short time, but from what I can tell, yeah, my feeling is that it seems to be, you know, improved. It seems to be really good. So yeah, I'm thinking it's that looks like a good jump up too. Yeah.
Well, certainly, you know, the engineers take this all on, and we learn from every camera as I bring you back to full screen. And as every camera comes along, I've noticed for the 36 years I've been doing this, there's always something really cool and updates that really make your life easier as a photographer. And certainly the quality levels of Z7 II have jumped up from the stuff that I've seen too. But thank you so much for sharing your little story here. Again, we don't want to make it easy, certainly to compress your time, to say get out there and use your talents. And certainly with landscape or wildlife, it's kind of unpredictable in a sense because you are dealing with weather factors in nature and But thank you for taking us on this journey. The van looked great. The dog looked great. Your assistant looks great. Like you said, maybe not too thrilled about that last shot, but I can't thank you enough for the insight you have here, because the key to all this is hearing from you, someone who's actually used the camera and the product, and, you know, instead of reading it on a page on a website or something like that. So I can't thank you enough for sharing your experiences.
Thank you. It was great to have the opportunity to actually have that camera in my hands, and I want it. So, yeah.
Well, we're happy that you want it, and we hope that many other people out there tuning in do as well. Great versatility with the Z7 II, high file sizes, big file sizes, nice ISO, good speeds, really versatile, DX crop modes, all kinds of things, the double card slots, dual processors. I mean, there's so much of these cameras now, and the Z7 II definitely lives up to the bill. So thank you for sharing that with us. And those of you tuning in, we thank you for spending this On Assignment Creators Hour with us, with Viktoria Haack from Canada. Got some great insight, some good insight about the camera, some great tips on landscape photography. So if you missed any part of this, go back, rewind, and you know, check out the entire interview. We've got more interviews online at the Creators Hour at NikonUSA.com with more on assignments from people that have used Z6 IIs and Z7 IIs. So please check those out. For Nikon, I'm Mike Corrado. We hope everybody out there stays safe. Shoot a lot of pictures and share them with us. We'd love to see them. See you soon.